Welcome back. Today we're breaking down the 2026 outlook for the global energy transition. What changes, what accelerates, and where the bottlenecks are. We'll cover 5 big themes. The demand shock, AI, data centers, and cooling. This solar paradox, growth continues, but the center of gravity shifts. Breakthrough tech, batteries, grids, and 5G advanced. Firm power returns. SMRs move to real site activity. Policy goes hard. Enforcement, carbon border costs, and supply chain transparency. In 2026, the energy transition enters a decisive phase, shifting from big plans to enforcement and industrial-scale implementation. But here's the catch. The world is still off track for the 1.5 degrees Celsius pathway, yet investment keeps hitting record levels. By 2026, power systems face unprecedented pressure from 3 converging demand drivers: data centers, AI, and cooling needs. Investment in data centers is projected to reach $580 billion in 2025/2026, with over 85% of new capacity concentrated in the US, China, and the EU, creating intense stress on specific grid clusters. And globally, electricity demand is rising 40% faster than total energy demand, meaning 2026 becomes a critical year for firming intermittent solar and wind with storage and dispatchable technologies. Cooling is the other silent driver. Rising incomes and temperatures are adding nearly 500 gigawatts to global peak demand by 2035, with acceleration expected as high-efficiency AC mandates begin taking effect in emerging markets. So the first story of 2026 is simple: more electrons, faster, in more places, under tighter reliability expectations. Here's a surprising headline from the Outlook. For the first time in 2 decades, 2026 may see a slight year-on-year decline in total solar deployments, from 655 gigawatts to 649 gigawatts, about minus 0.9%. But the real story is where the change happens. China's solar share is projected to drop from 372 gigawatts to 341 gigawatts. At the same time, non-China solar growth rises from 283 gigawatts to 308 gigawatts. The Outlook attributes this to China's consolidation under its upcoming plan, focusing on grid integration and high-quality growth rather than pure speed of deployment, while places like India, Africa, and Southeast Asia accelerate because solar remains the most cost-competitive source of new power. The Outlook frames 2026 as the commercial starting point for frontier technologies that reduce lithium risk and improve grid stability. Semi-solid-state batteries, Svolt Energy and Dongfeng Motor are expected to enter mass production and volume deliveries by September 2026, targeting 270 to 350 watt-hours per kilogram energy density, and supporting EV ranges up to 1,000 kilometers in certain vehicle integrations. Sodium-ion 2026 is described as the scale-up year, especially for high-power hybrid scenarios, UPS systems, and stationary storage, aimed at bypassing lithium supply chain volatility. One of the more grid-future signals in the Outlook is 5G Advanced, described as the first release to integrate AI or ML directly into network architecture. For utilities, the document highlights intelligent intent-based networks that can automatically optimize load balancing and potentially reduce grid edge outages by 40 to 50%. In 2026, the transition isn't just generation. It's also communications plus automation, turning grid operations into something closer to a self-optimizing system. The Outlook says 2026 is the year the SMR sector shifts from licensing to physical site activity. In Canada, Ontario Power Generation's Darlington project plans to assemble the Harriet Brooks tunnel boring machine in early 2026, marking progress toward North America's first commercial grid-scale SMR fleet. In the UK, Wilfa is expected to begin on-site activity in 2026, with plans aiming for 3 initial Rolls-Royce SMR units, often framed as powering roughly 3 million homes. And China is expected to use 2026 to evaluate scaling clusters of high-temperature gas-cooled reactors, building on earlier demonstrations. A defining feature of 2026 is policy shifting from targets to enforcement, particularly in the EU and China. China's 15th five-year plan is expected to be adopted in March 2026, shaping global supply chain dynamics for the rest of the decade, with early signals emphasizing new quality productive forces and strategic leverage in critical materials. In Europe, the outlook highlights multiple enforcement levers. The EU Circular Economy Act is due for adoption in 2026, aiming to double the EU's circularity rate to 24% by 2030 and establish a single market for secondary raw materials. The EU's CBAM enters its financial phase in January 2026, making carbon cost payments mandatory for covered imports such as steel and aluminium. Digital product passports. The outlook flags 2026 as the first mandatory implementation for iron and steel, pushing supply chain transparency on energy use and hazardous chemicals. Translation. In 2026, decarbonization becomes a competitiveness filter and compliance becomes operational, not optional. If you want a simple watch list for 2026, the outlook highlights major anchor events. January 2026, IEA Energy Technology Perspectives 2026. January 13th to 15th, World Future Energy Summit. February 18th to 19th, IEA Ministerial Meeting. March 2026, adoption of China's 15th five-year plan. May 19th to 21st, World Geothermal Congress. October 12th to 15th, World Energy Council Global Congress. The outlook's conclusion is blunt. 2026 is defined by the physical realities of the transition, grid bottlenecks, mineral dominance as statecraft, and the arrival of next-generation firm power like SMRs and next-gen batteries. It also anticipates a structural divide. Traditional fossil fuels face oversupply, citing an IEA forecast of an oil surplus of 3.84 million barrels per day, while critical materials for the green transition ride policy-driven demand. And for the first time, the self-healing grid moves from concept toward a 5G-enabled operational reality, setting the stage for the next decade of decarbonization. If you want, I can turn this outlook into a 2026 scenario map, best case, base case, and stress case, plus a slide-style visual pack for your video editing workflow. Drop a comment. Which 2026 theme matters most? AI load growth, storage, SMRs, or policy enforcement?